Hello, so this is going to be an ORNN artifact guide. We're going to be going through every ORNN artifact in the game currently in set 13 of TFT. We're also going to talk about which units those are particularly good on, as well as some broken combinations. And then additionally, I'm going to give you some suggestions on, like, you know, additional units or additional ideas that you can use with these ORNN artifacts at different points in the game. So without much ado, let's get straight into it. Also, I would like to say, if you do like my content, please make sure to like and subscribe. Numbers are going up, which makes me happy, so I'm getting a lot more noticeability, and it helps with these guides to get it into the eyes of people that they can help. Additionally, we have our giveaway. I'm not going to do the little giveaway slide thing, but basically, if you join the Discord, there's a TFT giveaway channel, and if you click the button, you can enter a giveaway. It's going to happen at the end of the week, where I'm going to give away some RP to whoever wins that. Without much ado, let's get straight into it, because this one might be a little bit longer, because we have to go through a lot of these artifacts. So how can you get artifacts in the game? Artifacts can come in multiple different ways, but you always kind of have to be a little bit prepared for them. A lot of times you get them through augments. There's different augments where they'll just give you like one ORNN artifact, or they'll give you a random artifact, or just like something like that. In general, whenever you're trying to play towards ORNN artifacts, if it's something that you're interested in, you always want to take the augments. They give you multiple copies of artifacts. For example, like, this is a bit of an outdated picture, but now there's like Artifactory, which used to be called something around What the Forge, or Living Forge. Ones where you get multiple ORNN artifacts gives you a greater chance of hitting a broken combination of two artifacts together, or artifacts with certain units. Artifacts, some of them have very specific conditions, and if you match them with certain units, so for example, like some of them say, like, if unit does blank, artifact does blank. If you find the combination that makes those work, or if you find it through buffing units with anomalies that give them those added benefits, or buffing units based on other artifacts, or synergies like with other augments, you can find like really insane combinations, and a lot of times that gives you like what I always joke as, like, you know, the pieces of Exodia that just win the game on the spot because of it. So always more is always better when it comes to artifacts if you're already trying to play around artifacts. That's why stuff like Artifactory feel really strong with certain comps. Additionally, the main reason you should always know how to play around artifacts is because there is a portal that the game just starts with an artifact. That's the Jace one. I know the picture here I have is of Victor, but the Jace one, they just added it to the game. I hate it. It's really annoying because basically what happens is you get an artifact and you have to try and structure a game plan around it really early on. Some people just giga high roll and you just hit one of the broken combinations on round start. So already on stage 2, you're already looking around and you're like, okay, that person looks like they're top 4 for sure. That person looks like they have a broken combination. And if you don't hit something, or if you hit like a little bit of like a weaker, you miss on the anvil, it feels very rough, and you really have to structure your game around like not playing for win out, but playing for top 4. But either way, I'm going to go through a lot of the combinations and some of like the more like forcing lines in this PowerPoint. So for sure, you'll be prepared for those situations a little bit better if you are not already prepared. Additionally, I would like to say, if you try and figure this stuff out on your own, please note that 6 costs skew results a lot. The 6 costs are basically very strong units, and they can pretty much all of them make use of pretty much any ORNN artifact just because it gives a lot of stats, and they can turn those stats into doing like magnificent and really strong things. If you ever find yourself in a spot where you have an ORNN artifact, you don't know what to do with it, or you want to put on a different unit, a lot of times the correct answer is just put on a 6 cost. Similarly, it's also put on a 5 cost. If you put them on high quality units, even if the artifacts aren't that great, or you don't have a broken combination, they do give a lot of stats, so they will help out a lot in that way. Anyways, explanation of turns. So for this slideshow, I'm just going to go through this really quickly. I use this color coding in these words. Basically, I'll say generic, specific, or forcing. It's basically like me trying to interpret or give you guys a little bit of a guideline on how you can use these ORNN artifacts. So if an ORNN artifact I say is generic, that means it's good on most units, and you can easily just transfer it onto like 5 cost or high cost units to like cap out your board. If I say specific, it usually means that there's certain conditions that the ORNN artifact says, like if X does Y, do Z, so you need to make sure that you reach those conditions in order for the artifact to even work properly. And then forcing is usually like either the item is very bad on some units and very good on some units, or it's some sort of broken combination that you should probably just angle yourself towards the comp that uses that item best, because it's the greatest placements that you'll get. It'll make you the strongest that you could be. So when should you take artifacts? It is very risky, but you should usually take artifacts if you have a comp that requires many items. It's just an extra item augment a lot of the time, so it can help you out a lot. Additionally, there's some comps that can use many different Ornn items. I know Ornn is spelled with 2 N's, by the way. I didn't edit the slide from last time. Somebody criticized that. I apologize. I'll fix it for next time I do this presentation. But basically, like, Family has a lot of game-winning situation with Ornn artifacts. Nocturne has like 3 or 4 Exodia game-winning conditions, which we'll talk about. And Emissary as well has similarly some Exodia combinations around Mbessa and other units. So if you're playing one of those 3 comps, like something that around those type of units, then it makes a lot of sense to just try and hit as many Ornn items as you can that you can use to put on all the units. Additionally, if you aren't playing any of those comps, but you know about a certain win condition and you have like a board that plays into that win condition, then you can try and go for the Ornn artifact to play for like the 1st or 8th, right? If you hit on the anvil, you just win, and if you don't, it's a little bit rough. But anyways, let's get straight to it. Last little bits of notes. Stats are skewed towards more popular comps. So like a lot of units that either revolve around Violet or Nocturne are usually going to have the units that are associated with Violet and Nocturne, so the family units or the Quick Striker units, saying that they're really good with Ornn artifacts. That's just because like you hit the broken combination on Nocturne, and all the other Ornn artifacts that you get, you put on the other units. A lot of that is because it's inflated with Artifactory, right? A lot of times if you're playing around Nocturne and Violet, if you see Artifactory, you almost always take it. So then you're basically left over with a bunch of junk items, and you're just fishing for like the 1 or 2 items that make Violet and Nocturne unbearably strong. So usually those units are going to have boosted stats, or they're going to look really, really good in the numbers, but it's not necessarily like I'm going to force towards that because this item is good on B or C, is what I'm trying to say. And then 6 costs also make great use of items. Okay, let's go through them. Alphabetical order. So if you're interested in finding a particular Ornn artifact, you can just go through it. I don't know if I got questions about like putting timestamps and stuff in my videos. It takes a lot of time, especially in these type of videos, so please just go to the part where it is. Anyways, Anima Visage. Anima Visage is very generic. It's a good tank item. You want to stack it with HP, usually because it heals percentage maximum health. It's really good with reroll units, and it's very good with tanky melee units. Sometimes. The main users that I put here are just some of the main tank units that you use for different reroll lines. Singed with Renata, Vander with Family, Scar, Blitzcrank, Amumu, with different variations of automata units. Additionally, any real tank could use it. I put Alawi and Rumble here because they make great use of it. Alawi's really hard to kill. She's often like the last unit alive on a board, and Rumble does a lot of damage as well. So just giving Anima Visage makes Rumble kind of get those multiple casts off and be really threatening into a late game board. Blightning Jewel. So Blightning Jewel is specific and forcing. Basically, Blightning Jewel is like every time you do damage, you reduce the target's magic resist by 4, and then you start to gain mana. The thing about it is that it's really good with units that do damage over time, or dot damage. There aren't that many dot damage units in the current set that are like very, very dominant. But it's also good with some multi-hit units. The main user that's probably good is Mel. Mel's really good at, like, she does like the whole multi-hit thing where, so as a 6 cost, Blightning Jewel would be really strong on her. Rumble's really good because he has a bit of dot damage if you get Flamethrower on Rumble. And then Singe, the Singe Hero Augment is absolutely busted with. Singe Hero Augment basically runs around and puts the gas out, and the gas just does constant magic damage. So their Blightning Jewel is really broken. Twisted Fate is also good, but that's probably because of like Nocturne, Akali, like what I was saying before, you just have extra artifacts. Kog'Maw's additional users that you can maybe use on Kog'Maw, LeBlanc, Heimerdinger, Silco. Powder in the stats says that it's pretty good, but I'm pretty sure that's just because Family is inflated with the Ornn artifacts. And Morgana says that she's pretty bad with it, but Morgana does dot damage, so if Morgana gets buffed in the future, she might be pretty good with it. A good idea of tech that you could do is where you can play around Blightning Jewel with Heimerdinger or Silco, and then eventually transition it into a Rumble later. Heimerdinger and Silco do multi-hit damage, similar to like Kog'Maw, but if you can transition, so for example, if you're playing Heimer Sentinels, you can get another Heimer item later, because it's not the best on Heimer, it's kind of like mid. It's like okay to put on Heimer, but it's not like giga good. But you can eventually transfer it onto a Rumble with Flamethrower, and then you can cap out your board like that if you ever hit a Rumble too. So that's like a little bit of like an idea that you can play around it. A lot of times you're playing around Visionaries with Blightning Jewel. It used to be okay on Malzahar. I don't know why I don't have Malzahar on this slide. I think it's just because after the Malzahar nerfs from the data I was looking at, it's not that good. But just note that it's also good on Malzahar. So basically like Visionaries is pretty good with this line. Defiance is very generic. It's good on melee units for survivability. or other units for survivability. The main thing that you have to note with Death's Defiance is that it's very similar to like a Bloodthirster, but you shouldn't just discount. Sometimes units really like to have both Death's Defiance and Bloodthirster, because Bloodthirster gives that health shield, so it's really useful in like giving a second lease on life, especially for frontline units. But the main users are usually the reroll dominant units that are like melee units like Violet, Nocturne, Akali, and Bessa is also pretty good with it. And then if you can make it to certain 5 costs and other 4 costs, you can also put on those units. So for example, Savika, Warwick, Mordekaiser, Vi, Rumble. If any of these units become really strong, or if you have a 2-star version of any of them, then Death's Defiance is probably going to be very strong on them as well. Deathfire Grasp. Deathfire Grasp is very generic. It also gives a little bit of damage amp. I think some of the tool tips, like some of the description of the items, the numbers are a little bit wrong. It's because it's a little bit outdated. They just recently changed some of the ORNN artifacts, and I didn't update it from the last patch. But basically what this does is it basically just blasts for a percentage max HP and also gives a little bit of damage amp. It's a very generic AP item. It's usually not the first pick, but it's very flexible in the different units that you can play. If we're thinking about some of the really strong lines that you might want to force towards if you have a Deathfire Grasp, Kog'Maw is really good with it, Renata is really good with it, LeBlanc and Malzahar are really good with it. Just in terms of like them being able to like burst through tanks and not getting stuck on anybody. Additionally, you have like your 6 costs like Mel and Victor, Twisted Fate. If you're playing around Artifactory and you're playing around Nocturne, you can then put the Deathfire Grasp on Twisted Fate. And then Powder, if you're playing around Violet and you take Artifactory, you can put the Deathfire Grasp on Powder. But just in general, you can put it on almost any AP unit and it will be really strong. Fishbones. So Fishbones, it basically doubles your attack range and it also gives you AD and attack speed. It's pretty specific and forcing. The reason it's a little bit specific is that some units really don't like it, even though it gives them good stats. So for example, it's really bad on Twitch in some cases, because Twitch already has a Fishbone style effect. So then it just kind of messes up the whole flow of his damage dealing. It still could be good on him in certain situations, but a lot of times you have to just be really careful. Another example is Corki. Corki, sometimes it's really good, but it's really good if you have like a combination of like Fishbones with like Gold Collector. Fishbones is really good with other ORNN artifacts, right? Fishbones Sniper's Focus, Fishbones Gold Collector. We'll talk about those other ones later as we go through this, alphabetically of course. And you'll see what I mean, that like if you have the synergy of like hitting random units at increased range, it's very strong. It's also forcing because it's broken on Nocturne. It's pretty good on Jinx as well. It's usually good with units that like high AD. It causes random switching, so a lot of times you want like the ult or the damage to be AoE, and then it makes great use of that. Because it gives extra range, it's also really good, like I was saying, with stuff like Sniper's Focus, which is another ORNN artifact. Or if you're trying to like snipe backline units, which Corki can do really easily because you just give him a bunch of AD, and when he does his ult, all the bullets go in random spots, so Fishbones can sometimes just kill units randomly. So it's really good with stuff like Jinx, Caitlyn, units that like extra range are it's very good with. So you'll see in the stats Mordekaiser it's pretty good with, Savika with Flamethrower, the ADAS, it also works really well with her. But you'll notice that Nocturne and Violet are up at the top. You should try and play Nocturne if you have this more often than not. Nocturne is the broken combination with +1 range. Nocturne's kind of frail and not very good at being like like if you have just Nocturne without an artifact, it's not that strong in the front line, but it is like giga, like unknowably broken. If it's like I don't know how to describe it. If you ever give Nocturne +1 range and you put him in the backline with one of these ORNN artifacts, it's like you're going top 2 almost always. Like, so long as you hit Nocturne 3 and you're not contested, I've seen people have 0 Nocturnes, get a Fishbones, roll to 0, find Nocturne 3 eventually, and then just win out from there. It's absurd how strong this unit is. They nerfed Nocturne recently, and that's literally just because of how broken it is with extra attack range. At first, I didn't know why it would be so broken with extra attack range. I wasn't a believer at first because I wasn't seeing it in all my games. I'm telling you now, with this Jace ORNN artifact, half the lobby is just like winning on the spot. If you just like, it's so ridiculous. So just trust me, if you see +1 range, you should at least consider playing Nocturne. And I'll talk about that because there's multiple items that do that. So there's so many ways that this guy can get +1 range. So we're going to talk about it as we go through. But please just understand that's why it could be forcing. You might just like, you know, if you have a +1 range, it might be a Fishbone spot, or it might be a Nocturne spot, excuse me. Okay, next, Gambler's Blade. So Gambler's Blade, it gives bonus attack speed if you have a bunch of gold, and then you have each attack has a 4% chance to drop gold. This is a pretty generic item because you can use it mostly for econ. It's not necessarily strong in terms of the stats that it gives, but it does generate you a bunch of gold. But the main user, if you see a Gambler's Blade that you should think of, is Kog'Maw. It's not forcing because you can technically put it on anybody and you can make use of it. It's also good on other units that like attack speed. If you're not going for like a pure Guinsoo plus Gambler's Blade, maximize econ, just make yourself like a mini bank, just printing money. You might want to just consider units that like attack speed, stuff like Silco, stuff like Zoe, Malzahar, Jace as well in some cases. Just having like a lot of starting attack speed is basically going to be like 70 starting attack speed if you have 30 gold. It's really good on some of those units like Zoe. A lot of times right now with Rebel, you usually put a Guinsoo on her nowadays because it's a little bit more efficient than putting like Shojin Nashers in terms of letting her scale into the fight well and cast a bunch. But like I said, if you have a spot for it, you should almost always play Kog'Maw. Kog'Maw gets so much attack speed, attacks so fast. If you do Guinsoo Gambler's Blade on Kog'Maw, you'll be rich for most of the game. It'll guarantee you hitting all your boards and being able to level. You'll just be like richer than everybody else in the lobby, and then you can always move it on to another unit later, right? Gambler's Blade, in the stats say, is really good on Malzahar. The chances are is that you just played Kog'Maw reroll, you have infinite gold, and then eventually you just transferred onto Malzahar and you capped out your board really high. Same with Jace, same with LeBlanc, right? You should always consider this item is mostly for gold, and then you just transfer it later. So, but it works really, really well with the Kog'Maw. Even if you're not playing Kog'Maw reroll, you can just put on Kog'Maw and scale up money. Next, Gold Collector. So Gold Collector is another econ generation one. Basically what it does is it gives you 30% it gives you AD as well as crit chance. I'm not sure if they changed the numbers recently. But basically it also has it as an execute. And if you execute someone, it gives you a chance of gold. It's pretty generic, so you can put on any AD unit. A lot of the AD units really like it. Units like Corki and Twitch that have good access to the backline, it works really well. The execute is also really, really good. If you have a balance of high AD as well as like backline access, you can basically scam a lot of fights with the Gold Collector. Now it is good on a lot of other units as well. In the stats, it's a little bit skewed towards artillerists, and I'm pretty sure that's because there is an augment in the game. I don't have a picture of it here, but there's an augment in the game where if your artillerists get a certain number of takedowns, you get a Gold Collector, and it's very, very broken. That augment is absolutely absurd. So usually you play it with Tristana reroll and Urgot reroll. So in the stats, you'll see that it's really, really good on Tristana, really, really good on Urgot, in addition to being really good on Corki. A lot of it is because you basically just cash out multiple Gold Collectors and you scale so hard with it. It's kind of insane. So obviously the stats are going to skew a little bit towards that. But if you're looking at the item and you're thinking, who can I put this on? A lot of times it's Corki, Twitch, or you get a late game carry like Jinx, Caitlyn, Jace, stuff like that. Stats also say it's really good on Nocturne. I looked a little bit deeper. It's good on Nocturne if you have something like Fishbones. It's good, like it's part of Exodia, right? It's not like Nocturne with Gold Collector is really, really strong. It's Nocturne with Gold Collector if you have a bunch of other artifacts is really strong, because if Nocturne has plus range and you give him an execute, then it's like giga broken, right? Like if you give him Fishbones, which gives him AS and crit chance, and then he has an execute with Gold Collector, it's like he just spins around infinitely, has increased range so you can't hit him, and then he just kills everybody. Like that's why it's good on Nocturne. So don't just force this isn't a force Nocturne off of Gold Collector situation. Horizon Focus. So Horizon Focus is very specific. Basically, if you stun an enemy, it deals 30% of their max health. It basically does nothing if you don't, like, it has a little bit of tanky stats, but it doesn't do much unless you stun an enemy. So this is only good on units that stun. It can be devastating, but it's not like, it's not going to carry you to an easy win, because a lot of the stun units aren't like, you know, giga broken with it. It's more so like it's really, really strong, but it's not like Exodia. However, it is probably Exodia on Victor. I haven't seen it in real life, but I can only assume. Victor basically stuns the whole board. So if you put Horizon Focus on Victor, I'm pretty sure he just cuts the whole board's HP by 30%, which is kind of nuts. So, like, I'm pretty sure if you see this and you find a Victor, I think that's probably Exodia and you win the game. Additionally, it's good on other units that stun, like Violet, Warwick, and Vi. Additionally, you could put on other units like Twisted Fate. I think Twisted Fate has some sort of stun at one point, and Bess has a little bit of a stun. Surprisingly, in the stats, it's really bad on Elise. So I'm not sure why, because Elise does do a frontline stun. I think it's just because Elise takes too long to cast. But you could assume that in certain conditions, it will probably be good on Elise. I just don't understand why it's not super good on her right now. But maybe it's just like a matter of like comps and buffing those units in those comps and making it work a little bit better in that case. But just be prepared. If a unit says that they stun, Horizon Focus will be good on them. Hull Crusher. So Hull Crusher is very generic. It's basically like gives you a bunch of armor and MR. And then it should give you like armor, MR, and then it gives you also like a bunch of HP if there's no adjacent allies. It's really good. It's really good for solo frontline units. So when you see it, a lot of times you should think like, okay, this is good if I'm rerolling something. So that's why I put Singe, Vander, and Blitzcrank. Of course, there's other reroll comps that can make use of it. It's very generic. You can put it on pretty much any tank. It also works nicely on strong melee units like Vi, Mordekaiser, Warwick, Savika, just because it gives them a lot of survivability. Melees not only need to do damage, but they also have to survive, and this is a very efficient item in giving them armor and HP that you can't otherwise get those type of combinations with other items without like wasting too many item slots. So it's pretty good on some units, but you could put it on anybody. It's very generic. Just put on a frontline unit and make sure that there's no adjacent people next to that person. Infinity Force. Force is another generic ORNN artifact. Basically, it just gives you a little bit of everything. Basically, every stat in the game, it gives you a little bit of it. The main time, usually you put it on a melee unit, because if you think about AD, AS, armor, MR, HP, like these are all stats that are good on not only damage dealers, but units that need a certain level of tankiness. So you would probably want to put it on a melee unit in general. There's a prismatic augment that's like gained to Infinity Forces. A lot of times you take that if you're playing like, you know, Ambessa Vi or Nocturne Akali or Pit Fighters, or like if you're playing multiple frontline units and you're trying to itemize 2 melee carries. It's very, very strong. That being said though, it does give a little bit of everything, so you could just take it and use it as an item for like other carries, even backline units. It gives mana, it gives AS, it gives AP, it gives AD, so it's very, very generic. Anybody that needs stats or can make good use of the stats, like for example, I'm sure Jace can make great use of the stats even in the backline, because he has both really good AP and AD ratios, stuff like that. You should just very, very open to this one. If you're not sure what you should take, this is one of those ORNN artifacts where it's like, okay, yeah, I can just put this on whoever and I'll probably be fine. Preference, of course, is melee frontline users. Those are the ones that are really going to shine with it. Innovating Locket. So Innovating Locket, basically the user gains a bunch of mana whenever they're attacked, and then every time they cast, they restore 20% of their HP. It's a little bit specific because a lot of times you want to put it with a solo tank as well as really high HP units. This is like the reroller's dream a lot of times with Innovating Locket, or if there's a unit that really wants to cast a bunch because it gives them a lot of their mana. So a lot of times, like if you think about Scar, Blitzcrank, these are units that are really strong off their cast. Rel has a really strong cast as well. Vander, but these are more reroll focused boards, right? You're not just gonna put on a Rel 1 and hope that you win the game. But with certain reroll lines, if you're rerolling Sentinels, rerolling Blitzcrank, rerolling Scar, rerolling Vander, it can make great use of Innovating Locket. Because it helps them survive a lot, recovers a bunch of their HP. If they're 3-star, they have a bunch of HP, and then their casts are also very meaningful. Additionally, you can put on pretty much anybody that you like their cast to happen, and you want them to have a certain amount of tankiness. I think that it's really good on Elise. Elise struggles to cast a lot of the time. Her stun is really, really important, and it can sway a lot of fights, but a lot of times Elise has a hard time getting the stuns off. Innovating Locket is something where she gets the mana that she needs. She can get the stun off. She can even get 2 stuns off sometimes. And she has a lot of survivability. And if you're playing like a bruiser style build, then Elise also get benefits from Innovating Locket, recovering more HP because they're going to have more base HP, because bruisers, their whole thing is that they gain a bunch of HP. Lich Bane. So Lich Bane, the user's first attack after each ability casts bonus magic damage. So this is a little bit specific because you want it to be with units that have high burst damage as well as cast a bunch of times, because then you won't get much use out of the Lich Bane unless you're casting a bunch. I think it's really, really strong on Automata units. Automata units, the way that Automata works is like after a certain amount of attacks, then they do like a burst, and that Automata burst blast thing does like their burst plus 25% of the previous attacks that they did. So there's a little bit like this awkward synergy between Lich Bane and the Automata Blast, that if they synergize together, you get like a giga hit off one of the hits. Like the Automata Blast just does an insane amount because basically the next auto attack does like more damage, and then the Automata Blast happens and it does 25% of the damage that you just got boosted from the cast. So it kind of like snowballs a little bit. So Kog'Maw it's pretty good on. Kog'Maw also casts a bunch, so he gets a lot of value off Lich Bane, and also gets a huge amount of AP because usually you're playing with Archangels. Additional users might be Renata. Renata scales really hard off the Archangels, so then she can kind of one-shot late game. And then Powder and Twisted Fate, I think, are more along the lines of this is a good item to put on them if you're already just rolling for a bunch of artifacts because you're playing around Violet Nocturne. So they look like they really like this item, but I'm skeptical about how strong they are with it because I think it's more skewed towards the rest of the comp being really broken with artifacts. Light Shield Crest. So Light Shield Crest basically shields every couple seconds based on the 50% of the armor and MR that the user has. So what you want to do is you can use this in a very generic way. A lot of times it's really good with reroll, but it's very good with Sentinel. Basically, you just want a bunch of armor and MR. Here I just put a picture of a Gargoyle Stoneplate, but just note it can be any frontline unit that just has a bunch of armor and MR. So if you have a frontline unit and just put like Dragon Claw, Bramble Vest on them, or Warmogs, or not Warmogs, sorry, or Gargoyle, you just put a bunch of armor on them, then every couple seconds they're going to shield based on how much armor they have. Obviously that means that Sentinel is really broken with this. Sentinel's gained so much armor. A lot of times I'm sure you can see an Alawi, and Alawi has like 200 armor. Anomalies also work really well with it. You can imagine that there's anomalies that give you like, there's one anomaly that's like get 225 armor. Well, guess what? Now you're going to be doing like, a 225 shield to everybody. Like, it's a lot, right? And also when the user dies that's holding Light Shield Crest, it then spawns a shield on everybody that's still alive on your team. So there's also that added effect. I also put just like as suggestions some of the reroll units as well, like Singed, Vander, Blitzcrank, and Rel. Basically like either Sentinel units, Automata units that gain a bunch of armor and MR like Blitzcrank, or other units that you're typically just stacking a bunch of resistances on in order to be like your solo or really strong frontline unit. The idea is if you put on an unkillable unit, you're going to get a lot of value off the shielding. That's going to make sure that none of your other units die. Luden Tempest. So Luden Tempest, 100% of overkill damage plus 100 is dealt as magic damage to 3 enemies nearest to the target. So you want a unit that's basically like either one-shotting or doing an insane massive damage in one hit. So think about like your crit, think about units that have like high burst damage. You don't want like, this isn't something that works with like damage over time. Like, this isn't gonna be like a Silco item, right? You want somebody that does like a big blast of damage, and then you can make a lot of use out of it. It's pretty specific for that reason. You have to make sure that your unit is doing like an insanely high damage cast. And a lot of times you're playing it, a lot of times like it doesn't even do that much unless you're playing it with one of those units. Victor says that it's really good on Victor. Now, here's something I'm going to introduce right now. It's good on Victor, not because Victor does burst damage. Victor, a lot of the time, if the ORNN artifacts give a lot of stats, right? If you don't know about this, I'm going to introduce this, but maybe I should have said it earlier. But Victor scales his damage, like he doesn't gain extra stats, right? If all his attack speed, AD, and AP just transfer into damage for it, like everything is turned into AP for him. So even though this gives like AD, that's going to turn into AP. So this is like a Giga Rabadons for Victor. And there's a lot of ORNN artifacts that are like that you'll see. They don't look like they're particularly like broken, but all like the extra stuff, because he doesn't gain mana and he doesn't gain attack speed and he doesn't use his AD. So all of it just like turns into damage for him. So it's really, really strong. Additionally, something like Akali, where a lot of times she's trying to one-shot a backline unit, could be really good on her if you're playing like Akali Nocturne reroll. Renata, that scales, a lot of times you're playing with Archangels and you're trying to just get her to one-shot units. Luden Tempest might be really good. It's usually like a really good item on her. Jace has really good AD and AP ratios, and backline Jace does like a giant burst shot. So Luden's Tempest with that can do a lot of damage to additional units. Additionally, you can look at units like Caitlyn, Twisted Fate, which has one like burst damage thing, and Powder, who has like the monkey that does the huge burst damage. Obviously, Twisted Fate and Powder a little bit skewed because of the stats that are really good on those specific comps. Manaz Zan. So Manaz Zan, basically like after casting the first time, you basically gain 120 mana over 5 seconds. The way that this works is that a lot of times it just means that you're putting this item on a unit and then they chain cast after like you put like after their first cast, they basically just like repeatedly cast because you get this huge influx of mana. So it's really good on most units that cast. A lot of times you can put it as an like you put it as a supplement or a replacement item for a mana item for backline caster units. Additionally, it's really good on units that scale with early cast. When I look at Manaz Zan, what screams to me is Dominators, right? Silco, Ziggs, these if you're playing Ziggs reroll, or Silco if you're just playing like vertical Dominators. Dominators, the way that their trait works is that they gain AP based on the amount of, like every time they cast, they gain AP based on the mana spent. So if you give somebody a Manaz Zan and they just chain cast in the beginning of the fight, it sets them up for most of the fight. They're going to have a huge amount of AP that they could then use to absolutely delete the board. Other units that are really good with it are units that you want to get through the first couple casts. Jinx is really good. You want to get through 3 casts with Jinx so that she fires the rocket. So you can get an early rocket with Manaz Zan Jinx. Jace does insane damage. And Mel, she's really good when she casts a bunch. Additionally, it can help her to get to that threshold where she saves your life. You know, if she gets 12 casts off. So it just seems like a really good synergy with Mel. Additional units are other 5 costs or other units that cast like Malzahar and Caitlyn. But pretty much this can be used on any casting unit. A lot of times if you put Manaz Zan, you don't build like the other mana items, but some other units you might want to do that. It just depends on the situation. It's not a strict replacement for like a Shojin blue buff because it does wear out eventually. But if you're trying to make like a high burst comp, something like Silco, Ziggs, or Jinx that you want to get those early casts so you scale really hard, it's a lot better on those type of units rather than, for example, like a Heimerdinger. Heimer, it's good on as well, don't get me wrong. I'm just saying like you might still need another item on Heimer to guarantee that he continues to cast. Actually, it's probably broken on Heimer, but it wasn't in the stats, so it wasn't as good in the stats, so I didn't put it on the slide. But anyways, Mittens. Mittens gives a bunch of attack speed. It also makes it so that the user kind of shrinks, so they look kind of cute on the board, and then they have increased movement speed. Because of the increased movement speed, a lot of times you're thinking about putting this on a melee item. You just want them to run around a lot. A lot of times if you're playing the game, you'll see a melee user, and they'll just be like walking very slowly towards their target. Mittens helps with that, right? It makes them walk faster towards their target. So it's very, very good on melee units, and the extra attack speed helps them to sustain themselves. So obviously, like along the Nocturne line, it's really good on Akali. It's probably good on Nocturne as well, but I think typically you're putting the other items on Nocturne, so it doesn't fit in that threshold really well, right? Like Mittens without, if you just give attack speed to Nocturne, you don't give tankiness to Nocturne, and you don't give Omnivamp to Nocturne, unless you have like the +1 range. Mittens isn't as good an item on him, so that's why I say Akali here. Violet, really good on because she just walks around faster. She walks really slow normally, and it gives her the attack speed, so she gets that sustain of doing damage and Omnivamp and healing. Warwick, Mordekaiser. Mordekaiser loves to have attack speed, right? Whenever you look at Mordekaiser, you should always think plus range because he has like an AoE effect where he makes like the circle around him. He hits a giant hammer, so plus range is huge. And additionally, he has his ult. The way his ult works or his cast works in the game is that he, like, for the next 10 seconds, he starts slamming his hammer bell thing, right? When he starts slamming, right, you want as much attack speed as possible because, and you want to be uninterrupted because it's basically like a little window, right? It's as many times as the Mordekaiser hits within that window, you increase your damage by a lot, right? So for 10 seconds, Mordekaiser is basically powered up. So attack speed items are really, really strong on Mordekaiser. That's why even something like QSS is one of Mordekaiser's best items because it makes sure that he doesn't get interrupted and it gives a bunch of attack speed. So Mittens works along the same idea where you just give him a bunch of attack speed and he just goes off. Additionally, you can also put on backline units, Draven, Victor, Mel, just giving them attack speed to help them cast. For Victor in particular, the 60 attack speed basically turns into AP that makes Victor do more damage. So this is basically like a Rabadon's for Victor that chills. So Victor is very, very good. If you see an item that gives a bunch of stats, you can just shove it on Victor and he just does a shit ton of damage because that's the way he's designed. So, you know, if you see a Victor and you have an Ornn artifact, chances are put it on him and it'll pop off, right? And it'll be like giga broken on him. Anyways, Mogul's Mail. So Mogul's Mail is pretty generic. I didn't highlight it in green, sorry. But it's a generic item. It's usually just an econ item. It is pretty underpowered, so typically you avoid this one for the other econ augments or other econ items. Usually you'll take Gambler's Blade or Gold Collector because they just have better effects. This one's like pretty good on solo frontline tank, so it's more of a reroll unit thing because it's like the more times that you get hit, you basically get this extra gold drops. So a lot of times you want to put on like some unkillable unit, like a 3-star Singe with items, 3-star Scar, 3-star Blitzcrank. Even a 3-star Swain, it says, is pretty good in the stats, because then you just generate your gold that way and make a bunch of gold. It's also okay on Elise because it gives a lot of stats that Elise can use: the HP, the magic resist, and the health. And being a bruiser, she can make really good use of those. But like I said, it's a little bit underpowered, so it's not something you generally want to like structure your game plan around. It's more so like, okay, I got this, maybe I angle a reroll to get the best use of it, but if not, I just use it for as much gold as I can, kind of like an econ augment, try and cash out 1 gold per turn. Prowler's Claw. This one I didn't highlight as well, so this one's very specific. The idea with Prowler's Claw is that after you kill a target, you basically shed negative effects, and then you dash to the farthest target within 4 hexes. So you basically jump around after killing different units. They also do extra crit strike damage. So if you have a build with this, you typically want to pair this with other crit damage, or you want to put it on units that are ambushers. It's pretty specific because they dash around a lot and they go to like 4 hexes, so you can't just put on like a random backline unit. They're gonna like grief themselves, so you pretty much have to put on a melee unit. It gives a large amount of AD, as well as crit chance, and it also has like really high mobility for those units because you basically just dive instantly to the backline. So you always want to put it with the crit builds, and you can only really put it on frontline units. This is like the go-to Camille item. It's pretty much a Camille force item a lot of the time, but it's good on a lot of other units like Akali, Nocturne, Violet, Warwick, any melee frontline units, Savika, Vander, even Darius a lot of times as well. Darius has these weird effects where if he jumps to a backline unit, he has a bleed effect. So sometimes he can actually like proc bleed and kill some backline units. So there's a lot of like teleportation or jump to the furthest unit that Darius can make great use of, but a lot of times it's because he's paired with the Violet. It's not like a Darius outside of the family doing broken stuff. It's more so like Darius in those situations. Maybe with like Conqueror buffs, this might be a thing if you're playing like reroll Conqueror without family, but just important to note. But the main user that you want to think about with this is Camille. It's also really good on Nocturne, Akali, but typically it's more Camille focused because you get the crit. You get the crit damage that scales really well with the ambushers, and then with the ambushers you don't have to build like an IE as well to make sure you get the guaranteed crit on the ability. Rapid Fire Cannon, or RFC. This is gain +1 range, increase whenever you kill an enemy. This one is one of the most annoying items in the game now because I don't know why they designed Nocturne the way they did. I think it's just really, really sad the way things worked out because I get so frustrated. But anyways, I digress. This item is very generic, or it's very forcing if you want to play Nocturne. The reason it's generic is because you can easily just use it for attack speed on multiple units, frontline or backline. It's basically attack speed. It's like a Gwinsu that didn't stack yet. You just get an instant stack on it, right? So it's pretty good on backline units that love Gwinsus, but not necessarily all of them. The increased range and the progressive increasing range also causes some weird interactions, which we'll talk about in a second. But it's also good for units that are trying to snipe backline or have like multi-hit or AoE effects. I always mention Nocturne as being frail melee because that's just kind of how I describe him. I understand he can be tanky with 6 Automata. I know I had a comment about that, but that's like a very rare situation because you have to have an Automata emblem, you have to be already playing Nocturne, and you have to be able to make it to find a Malzahar. So, you know, I digress. But anyways, it's basically like if you see this item, you should always look around and see if you can just play Nocturne. Even if you don't have a copy of Nocturne, you can probably force into Nocturne and probably get a top 1, top 2, top 3. It's very easy to top 4 with this with Nocturne. Nocturne's effect works really well with +1 range. We were talking about it before. This one also increases the range every time the holder kills an enemy. It's insane on Nocturne, and it gives a bunch of attack speed. So Nocturne just instantly starts the fight, and he's spinning around like a Beyblade and just absolutely like shredding through everybody. It's so strong. It's also really good on Mordekaiser. It gives attack speed +1 range, so it works really, really well on Mordekaiser. It's also really good on the stats on Draven. Draven likes to have a lot of attack speed, so you can do the whole empowered axe thing and do a bunch of damage. So this just gives a bunch of starting attack speed, and it makes it so that Draven doesn't have to spend a lot of time walking. He can just focus on shooting and juggling the axes, which is really cool. Additionally, from similar things as before, it's good on a lot of melee units that like attack speed. They can do similar to Nocturne. They can just stay a little bit out of harm's way, like Warwick, Violet. Mel and Victor really like the stats because Mel, the attack speed is really good. And Victor, all that attack speed, it's 75 AP. It's like a Giga Rabadon's. So if you put this item on Victor, it's a Giga Rabadon. So if you're playing around something, you don't hit your units and you still have an RFC and you see a Victor, you put it on Victor and you just win out. Like it's so strong on like whenever you see something that gives a bunch of stats, either an AD or AS, it just turns into AP for Victor. So I'm gonna replay my playlist. Let's keep going. Seeker's Arm Guard. So this one's could be generic or specific. It kind of depends. But basically what it does, it gives you ability power, armor, and magic resist, and then it increases if they're the ones that get the kill. So because it deals with takedowns, you usually want to put it on units that are doing AoE or hitting a bunch of units, or you can just put it on a tank and just sack that. So just use it as a tank thing, because they basically just increase their armor, magic resist, and AP. So if you have like an AP tank, it's pretty good. It's really hard to find a main user. I don't think this item's particularly strong. If you see it, I don't think you're saying to yourself, damn, I'm gonna play this unit, I'm gonna win out. It's more so like, hey, this item's pretty good on some options, with some options. I think the best user of it is Blitzcrank, but it could be skewed because of Nocturne and Kog'Maw stats. They really like certain ORNN artifacts. But the idea is that if you have a unit that does a bunch of AoE damage or hits multiple units, they'll participate in the takedowns, and then they get a bunch of ability power and magic resist and armor. So they become really tanky. Additionally, like units that do AoE, like Malzahar, Victor, Mordekaiser has a little circle thing around him. Renata hits multiple units, for example. Mel hits the whole board. They all participate in multiple takedowns, so they'll just gain a bunch of ability power, right? Every unit that dies, they basically gain 15 ability power. So you don't have to necessarily be a frontline unit. It's just a lot of stats on units that hit a lot of different units, right? You can imagine Mel, Victor, Malzahar, that they spread to like the whole board. They can do a lot. They can do a lot of work, right? Silvermere Dawn. So Silvermere Dawn, this is one of those like really annoying items again. This one's really funny. So basically what it does is it grants immunity to stuns. The holder's attack stun the target and also locks your attack speed. It makes it so you can only attack at a certain attack speed. But the main reason you take this is because it gives you 165 AD. It just gives you an insane amount of AD, like so absurd. Like it is so much AD. It is like baffling how much AD this item gives. But the idea is that it's generally pretty specific, or forcing based on the units. You really want to put on like Camille, Violet. Those are the two like go-to users when you see Silvermere Dawn. The reason that you can't put it on anybody is because it locks the attack speed. So some backline units where you're not expecting them to cast multiple times, it's fine. But there's some units where it absolutely griefs them. It does give stun immunity. So it's really good on frontline units as well as backline units if the other team has a bunch of stun. But the idea with the stun immunity is that it's basically like a built-in QSS. So a lot of times it's good with like melee units. It's good in melee mirror matchups, right? Because it causes your attacks to stun the opponent. So it's really nice. It kind of has like a little bit of interruption. Like I said, Camille Violet is usually who you're angling towards this. A lot of times this is like a Giga Violet item. But then again, guess what? 165 AD. That turns into 165 AP for Victor. Hey, you know what would make Victor really broken? If you gave him 3 Rabadons. You know what else you can give him? A Silvermere Dawn, because that's basically what that is. It's insane. So that's like some weird niche interactions. Like if you end up in a game state where, like, let's say you're trying to play around Camille, you don't hit Camille, you hit Victor instead, you can pivot, you can just shove it on Victor. His attack speed is locked anyways. He doesn't gain attack speed, so he doesn't even have the negative effect of Silvermere Dawn, from my understanding. Now, you know, I'm yet to see it in real life because it's very situational, but you know, guess what? That's a thing that can happen. Other melee users like Warwick, it's very hard to play around. It says that in the stats it's really good on Caitlyn. I think it's because Caitlyn just goes around one-shotting everything in the backline with that much AD, because she has a damage amp from Enforcers, and then she has the AD from this. So you can put on some backline units, but I would caution you to be careful, because with the locked attack speed, sometimes they just don't cast and you just grief your game. Additionally, there's synergies with Silvermere Dawn and another item, which we talked about before, Horizon Focus. All the attacks with Silvermere Dawn stun the opponent. So if you put Silvermere Dawn and you get a Horizon Focus, you put them together, every one of your attacks does 30% max of their health. Just throwing it out there. be careful. That's a thing. That's a thing you should look out for. That's what I mean by some artifact. I'm not going to talk about every broken combination because there's so many, and then some of them work with certain augments, right? Some augments give you, or support items give you shields or other effects, and some anomalies give you shields and stuns and chills and this and that. But like the idea is like you should always look for that, right? If you see common words in items, chances are if you put them together, they're good. Sniper's focus. So guess what? +1 range. Who are we going to talk about? Nocturne. This one's pretty generic though. You can put on a lot of different units. It gives increased range and it gives you more damage the further away you are. Basically, Sniper's focus is like the ORNN artifact that's like the sniper's the trait as an artifact. With the increased range and damage, it does more damage the further you are away. So it works with many units, but AoE units that just hit the whole board anyways take great luxuries in Sniper's focus. So we'll talk about Nocturne in a second, but things like Jinx, Ziggs, Corki, right, where they hit multiple units, and they spread out like very far away from themselves, like Jinx Rocket with Sniper's focus. The fringe areas of that rocket are going to do massive amounts of damage. But then it's also really good on units like Mordekaiser and Nocturne, because with Nocturne, it basically just gives him damage amp, and makes him be a backline unit, right? That's all Nocturne wants to be in life, is a backline unit. They're even nerfing Nocturne over the patch. They nerfed him in the B patch because of these interactions. I guarantee you that's why he got nerfed. It wasn't even got nerfed because he's winning every game. He's winning every game when you have like Sniper's focus or Fishbones or the other one, RFC, on him. So it is very strong. It's still very strong even after the B patch. So just be prepared. If you see a Sniper's focus, just be ready. Maybe play Nocturne if it's uncontested. Now this one is a little bit worse than RFC and Fishbones if I'm not mistaken. It also is a little bit more flexible. You can play it on Draven, Tristana, like pretty much anybody that likes to have like a little bit of extra range so they don't have to move around a lot. Victor, for example, hits the whole board, so you get a lot of Sniper's focus value off of that. And additionally, somebody like Zoe, right? Zoe shoots her little shot, and then it bounces around throughout all of the enemies. So when it bounces, the further away it is, it will do more damage if it bounces further with the Sniper's focus. So it's really good at like sniping the backline. So just make sure, like, it's pretty good on a lot of units. It's probably diminishing returns on sniper units, but just be aware that, like, it's not as annoyingly forcing as some of the other ones because it doesn't give as much stats as those other ones on Nocturne. So it's not like this one is the one where you see it, you probably still consider Nocturne, but you don't have to force towards Nocturne. Like, there's other options that are equally or around as good, if that makes sense. Spectral Cutless. So Spectral Cutless gives AD and crit chance. So basically what this does is it teleports you to the back line. Basically it mirrors where you teleport. If you haven't seen it, it takes a little bit of getting used to. But basically you will flip the board like across like a diagonal, and that's where you will appear on the opponent's side of the field. It's very specific or forcing. A lot of times you're putting it with a melee unit, and you're just trying to snipe the back line. It's very strong to cheese the opponent, right? If someone doesn't scout or doesn't see that you have this item and you are able to play around it, you just could instantly kill their backline unit. And then once you lose their backline unit, they lose all their damage. Now, one thing you have to note is that the teleport happens first. So a lot of times you can grief your own unit if they're not tanky enough, or if you don't have, like an Edge of Night or something else to keep them alive. But these are really good on the reroll Violet and Camille lines, because obviously if you just teleport to the back line, they just instantly kill the backline unit. And Bessa is really good with it. Akali is really good with it. Similarly, because if you have 3-star version of Akali or you have Mbessa, they can just teleport to the backline. Vi is also really good with it. Something you can always do with these items is you can pair it with a unit that has a stun. Or if you have Spectral Cutless and Silvermere Dawn as an interaction, then you just appear on the backline unit and you just stun them. And that's what happens with Vi a lot. Vi's really tanky. You put Spectral Cutless on her, she jumps the backline, and then she instantly grabs the opponent and she just dunks them. It's like, okay, like, they've just been removed from, even if you don't kill it, it's been removed from the game long enough that you probably won the round anyways. So that's like interaction you should always be aware of. Then also it's good on other melee users like Savika. Nocturne, it's good on in some cases. This is if you're not playing RFC Nocturne or like +1 range Nocturne. You could just make the Nocturne teleport to the backline, then you start spinning around and kills the unit instantly. So that's something that can happen. Darius as well is really good with Spectral Cutless. I'm not sure if it's just because of the Violet family line. It's kind of like skewed stats because artifacts are just strong with that line in general. So any artifact is good on any of those units. But Darius has like a bleed effect. So he's really good at teleporting in, hitting the backline unit, applying the bleed, and then maybe they just die without him even having to do that much work. So that's like part of it. Suspicious Trenchcoat. I have been so upset with this item in recent history. If this is your favorite item, that is fine. I hate this item and I can't wait. I think when it first came out, I thought it was really cool. And over the time now, it has been like 3 sets where this is one of the most broken items always. It is very, very annoying to me that it still exists in the game. But of course, I digress. Like, you know, TFT has to have fun things like this to make it more entertaining for people playing it. But, you know, it is what it is. Basically, this got recently nerfed as well, so the numbers I have here are a bit inaccurate. But basically what happens is, once per combat at 50% health, the holder splits into 3 copies of themselves. It's very generic because you can put it on pretty much anybody, just get 3 copies of a unit. But it's often very forcing in the current patches because it's like what unlocks a lot of the potential of Violet and Mbessa. If you have Suspicious Trenchcoat on Violet or Suspicious Trenchcoat on Mbessa, it's like almost game winning a lot of the time. Suspicious Trenchcoat on Violet used to be such a problem. It's a lot better now, but it's still quite a problem. Basically, when you split, it not only splits the target, it also removes the not only splits the user, it also removes the targeting. It's like a little bit of an Edge of Night effect. So if, let's say you have a Violet and then she just like gets blasted and then she splits with Suspicious Trenchcoat. Those Suspicious Trenchcoat, when it pops, the backline unit isn't targeting the Suspicious Trenchcoat user anymore because it counts like an Edge of Night, right? It counts as like a de-aggro. So what ends up happening a lot of times, if you position the Violet or Mbessa, especially Mbessa where she dashes through the front line, if they just die and they proc Suspicious Trenchcoat, you just have 3 copies of the unit behind enemy lines. A lot of the time that happens. And if that happens, most of the time, at least one of those copies of those units turns around and just kills your main carry. It's so hard to play around. There are so many times where Mbessa dashes through Suspicious Trenchcoat's procs, and then 2 Mbessas, they're like, I don't know who to target. There's no space here. They turn around, they just kill your carry. And there's nothing you can do about it, because it's like I either kill it or I don't. Like, I can't turn off my carry. I can't make them not kill the unit. It's like, it's so difficult to deal with. The other thing that you should always note about Suspicious Trenchcoat though is that it doesn't duplicate anomalies. They hard coded that as a thing. Like, that's like a thing in the set, right? If you have an anomaly that gives you a bunch of armor, a bunch of AD, and then the Suspicious Trenchcoat pops that anomaly user, you're not tripling your anomaly. They lose the anomaly effect once the Suspicious Trenchcoat procs. So please be aware of that. However, the reason this was broken for so long was because, you know what it doesn't take away? Violet 4. If you get Ultimate Hero and you make Violet 4, when it splits, it's 3 Violet 4s. Anyways, the thing that makes this really broken is also the interaction with different items. So for example, let's take Mbessa. I know it's really low resolution. Excuse me, I was trying my best to make this in a timely manner. You take Mbessa, right? You give her Trenchcoat, and then I'm giving her Zhonya's. Basically, Zhonya's another item that de-aggros. It basically makes you invincible. If you played League, that it does similar what it does in League. I don't really know. I never played League. That's what I've heard. It's similar to like an Edge of Night, right? What happens is you take Suspicious Trenchcoat, you take Zhonya's. You try and kill the Mbessa. Zhonya's proc, she turns golden, she's untargetable, and she lives. That's cool. Okay, I fight the Mbessa again. What happens? Suspicious Trenchcoat procs, and now there's 3 Mbessas. Oh no, what do? There's 3 Mbessas. It resets the Zhonya's. So now, if you try and kill any of those 3 Mbessas, you get another proc of Zhonya's. It's so broken, right? That's what like another ORNN artifact item pairing that really strong. It also works with Edge of Night. That's why these comps are so strong. Like, you can imagine if you put an Edge of Night on an Mbessa and you put Trenchcoat on Mbessa, it's so hard to deal with because she dives through, like she runs through the tank, right? So she's literally on the opposite side, like behind enemy lines. You try and kill her, she de-aggros, and then she makes 3 copies of herself, and then they each can de-aggro again. It's so strong. So you should always, like, that's why it's good with these particular units. It's probably also good with maybe like a Camille or something. But those units are generally a little bit weaker right now, so it doesn't really work that well. Additionally, you can use it on stuff like Warwick, Blitzcrank, Akali. Symmetric Trench Coat is probably good on every 6 cost because you just get 3 copies of the 6 cost at one point in the fight. So that seems like good tech. But Warwick is the one that's going to make the best use of it because he's in that melee, diving the backline, doing damage type of situation. Alright, Symmetric Trench Coat done. Talisman of Ascension. Talisman of Ascension is usually pretty forcing. The reason that's a little bit forcing is because it's really hard to play around. It's generally really bad. A lot of times the fight is over before you ever get your Talisman of Ascension proc. So the reason it's forcing is that you really need... Oh, sorry, I said Exodia C Nasus video. That's from last set, not this set. I haven't taken Talisman of Ascension yet. But basically, like, you really need like an unkillable unit or a board that has like unkillable situation. So think like your Scar, Kog'Maw, like those boards that just live forever and they're just really hard and they scale into late. Renata, if you've seen Renata, it's usually like 6 Sentinel. Renata just gives shielding to everybody, they live forever. Vander is hard to kill. Those are units that usually make good use of Talisman of Ascension. Otherwise, like, you know, 6 costs are really good within Mel. Dr. Mundo, very specifically, if you can find a situation to make it work, it's really, really strong because Mundo scales off HP. So if you get the Talisman of Ascension proc, then he just becomes insanely strong because he gets like massive HP and then he does AoE damage based on his HP. I say it's good with hero augments as well. Hero augments are a little bit outdated right now. Like nobody really plays them because they're really hard to play right now. There's a lot of them are like one cost units. But a lot of times if you have a hero augment, it's in the past it was usually really good because usually with the hero augment you're making like one unit being like a giga unkillable unit. Alright, Trickster's Glass. Trickster's Glass is pretty generic. It basically just makes a copy of you with a little bit of decreased stats, right? Like less health and more mana threshold, so like it's harder for the unit to cast. Is not like a really, really strong item, but it is very strong situationally because it basically makes a second copy of a unit. If you have a unit that you want a second copy of, it's very, very strong. You can put it with reroll tanks, but a lot of times it's good with high cost units. Specifically, if you think about any of the 6 costs, Trickster's Glass is really, really broken if you ever hit one of them. Probably better than any other user would be like a Victor or a Mel or a Warp, because you're basically duplicating a unit that is so incredibly strong. You basically get to, like, imagine what's better than playing 1 Victor on your board. What about playing 2 Victors on your board? What's better than playing 1 Warwick on your board? Probably 2 Warwicks on your board. It's absurd, so you should always angle yourself towards those. Additionally, you can think about like 5 cost units or Giga Tanks like Jace or Vander. Or like Jace being like a backline unit, or Vander just as my hallmark example of, hey, this is a unit that fits in really nicely with Ornn artifacts. A lot of times you're trying to get Trenchcoat or Silvermere Dawn, or Zonya's for a, like, you're usually taking artifacts to try and get that for what's her name, for Violet, because you're playing family reroll, so usually you just pop Ornn artifacts with that comp because it's really, really good. So if you don't hit and you hit this, you might want to put on Vander and just make like 2 Giga Tank Vanders to kind of stabilize your board. Next, Unending Despair. Unending Despair is a specific item. So the way this works is whenever a shield on the holder breaks, you basically do damage based on that shield. Now, it's one of those if X happens, do Y. So therefore, you need a unit that has shielding. Units that shield, a couple of them that are pretty good. Loris, Rel, Blitzcrank, Vander, Vi. It's really good on all of these units. Darius also has a shield. Additionally, in some situations, you can think about Mordekaiser and Rumble. Mordekaiser and Rumble get shields from Scrap and Dominator respectively, so it also procs on those type of shields, but I wouldn't recommend it. It's usually like a late game situation type of thing, and because they're 5 costs, right? Like, I don't think Unending Despair would be good on Mundo because Mundo is a Dominator, right? That's not the same logic. It's mostly because Mordekaiser is very strong, therefore it makes use of the item, and Rumble is very strong, therefore it makes use of the item and the stats really well. Additionally, there's like some Exodia situations. I'm pretty sure the best user of it is Blitzcrank. If you can hit a Blitzcrank 3 with Unending Despair, that dude gets so many shields and does not die. And with Automata, you get a bunch of armor, and Unending Despair gets a bunch of HP. So you get like a Giga Tank Blitzcrank that then does like additional magic damage every time the shield breaks, which is like all the time because he's just infinitely shielding. So like, I think that's like the broken situation. But Loris and Rel are also get shield and have value based on that. Vander as well gets a shield. That's when he does his whole brace thing and he puts up his hands. And Vi gets a shield. So you can play towards all of these lines, but a lot of times, like, you know, if you're already playing like a Blitzcrank reroll, either Dominator reroll with Blitzcrank, or you're playing Blitzcrank with Nocturne and those type of situations, then Unending Despair would be probably good to take to put on those units if you didn't have the other items to take. Wit's End. So Wit's End is pretty specific or forcing. The way Wit's End works is basically your attacks deal bonus magic damage. It's basically like the Kog'Maw passive, the Ornn artifact. It's kind of funny. But basically, you want to put this on an auto attack or somebody that's attacking a bunch. Additionally, you also heal based on the amount of magic damage that you do with the item. So it's really good with units that attack a lot. If you think about a typical Guinsoo user, that's going to be your go-to. Kog'Maw, Twisted Fate are really good. Nocturne as well, and Akali. A lot of times you can get them to pop off and do a lot of attacking. Additionally, it's good on 6 costs or other units because it has a little bit of an Omnivamp effect, so what Mel and Warwick, as well as doing extra damage based on attacks. I don't think it procs on all of Mel's attacks, by the way, but it does pair really well with Guinsoo. So typically this is like, you see it and you want to think more along the lines of like a Kog'Maw style user. Think of it almost like a better Gunblade for Kog'Maw. He doesn't heal the rest of the board, but he heals himself, so it gives him an incredible amount of sustain that can give a lot of longevity. Finally, we have our last Ornn artifact. Sorry for this video being so long, but it had to be long because we're going through all the Ornn artifacts. But basically, this is going to be the Zhonya's Paradox. So Zhonya's, once per combat, you become invulnerable and untangible or targetable for 3 seconds. It is very good on melee frontline units. It's very good for survivability. It has a lot of synergies. We talked about Zhonya's with Trenchcoat before. So it's very strong on Vi. It's very strong on Mbessa. Very strong on Mordekaiser. But also, this item is very, very generic because you can put on a lot of backline units, right? It's basically like anti-snipe prevention, right? Like imagine you put on a Kog'Maw, right? It gives AP, so you can just put on Kog'Maw in the backline. You'll be in a good spot because your Kog'Maw will never die. Like you won't run into a situation where he gets sniped by somebody else and you lose all of your damage. So it's really good on AP backliners. Additionally, you should always consider it, even though it's an AP item, like it gives AP, it's good on all the melee frontline units. It's basically like a better Edge of Night in a lot of ways because it makes you untangible for 3 seconds. So it gives you a lot of time to just be like completely like out of the fight and give you time to like attack and heal and like live and stuff. So always consider it on those melee units. Anyways, without much ado, that's the end of the presentation. So hopefully that was enjoyable. I know this was a really knowledge dump. There wasn't much videos or fun parts, and a lot of it was just me like speaking as fast as I humanly can about artifacts. But yeah, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe. If you found it informative, make sure to like and subscribe. This one took a lot of work because I tried my best to like not only look at the stats, but also interpret them in such a way that I'm not misleading you guys on what's strong and what's weak. Right? It's really easy for me to say this looks broken in the stats and has like a less than 1% play rate. I feel like, you know, I'm trying my best here. Hopefully that was enjoyable. Hopefully you guys learned something and you have a little bit of a guide for artifacts. I'll try and put timestamps in it. It won't happen today though. It might happen tomorrow because today it's already late and I'm gonna have to go like sleep and stuff or relax. So yeah, thank you for watching and have a great rest of your day and happy climbing. Hope you enjoy the patch. Bye.